All right, welcome to Thoughts Can Heal. I'm your host, Denise Lynn. And before we dive in, I want to invite you to check out Yoga and Abundance Zen Den, my online yoga studio, where you can enjoy a free 14-day trial. It's a space for yoga, personal development, and stress relief, designed to help you cultivate balance and abundance in your life. Today, I'm honored to welcome Judith Belmont, a mental health author and speaker who has written 11 books focused on providing practical tools for emotional wellness. Her latest book, 110 CBT Tips and Tools, published by Pesci in January, is part of her popular Tips and Tools for the Therapeutic Toolbox series. This book is designed for both therapists and self-help readers, offering hands-on strategies to navigate stress, anxiety, and life's challenges. I'm excited to dive into her insights. Welcome to the show, Judith.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, just to start off, can you share a little bit about your background and what led you to specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy?
Well, I am retired now, but I had over 40 years of experience as a psychotherapist in private practice. And I also did some training and speaking for, other therapists, as well as just general workplace wellness talks that I had given. And that led me to publishing because Pesci is, I believe, the biggest continuing ed provider in the country for continuing ed for therapists, and they're also a publisher. And they invited me to write a book for them, which ended up being many books. So that's kind of how I fell into that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, for my listeners who might not be familiar, can you just briefly explain CBT and why it's such a powerful tool for mental wellness?
CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and it is the most widely adopted therapeutic approach in the world. It's very, very hands on. It focuses on changing your thoughts to change your life, identifying what are some erroneous ways of thinking or irrational ways of thinking. And it gives you different tools to reframe, restructure thoughts so that you can actually then feel better and then behave better. So, CBT focuses on the importance of thoughts and how it creates the feelings. And we have control over our feelings by controlling our thoughts.
I 100% agree. That's what this podcast really, this is how it all kind of came about. What are some common thought patterns that people struggle with, and how can CBT help them shift these patterns?
Well, CBT is especially helpful for people with low self esteem, with depression and anxiety, because usually people who have anxious thoughts or depressing thoughts that are kind of out of the range of normal. We all have some sadness, we all have some anxiety, and anxiety in some ways can be very adaptive if we are driving at a highly trafficked road and we're not anxious about the traffic a little bit, we might go too fast and we might not be careful. So anxiety isn't bad to a certain degree, but we're talking about anxiety that is a bit out of control, or depression, which is a bit out of control. And I would say that people have a lot of self limiting beliefs, such as I am not good enough, they're better than me, I'm a loser. People have a lot of narratives about themselves, maybe that they've heard from other people, or maybe they just developed on their own. And CBT helps them look at the quality of their thoughts, what they're thinking, such as I'm a loser. Identify cognitive distortions, which in this case would be labeling. Uh, you're labeling yourself as a loser, which isn't really rational thinking. You're becoming very one dimensional in the way that you're looking at things. And then you challenge that cognitive distortion and you replace it with, well, up until now, I haven't succeeded as much as I would have hoped. That would be an example of restructuring that thought that I'm a loser.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that seems very helpful. And yeah, I mean, I noticed that myself just dealing with my own anxiety, just the thoughts, and you know, reframing them is such a powerful tool. Um, what are some, let's see, like self-sabotage and negative thinking loops are common struggles. Like, what practical tools from your book can help someone break free from these cycles? If you don't
Well,
mind sharing a few.
the first thing you have to do is separate your thoughts from your feelings because you can't tell yourself not to be hungry,
Right,
but because that doesn't help. So it's just like you can't tell yourself, oh, cheer up or feel better or just chill or something like that. So, what is a thought and what is a feeling? A lot of people confuse them. So they can't change their feelings because they don't know, they can't change their feelings directly, but they don't know what their thoughts are. So, for example, I feel like you're criticizing me. Is that a
mm,
feeling or a thought? A lot of people think that that's a feeling. I feel like I'm being thrown under the bus. I feel like I'm being criticized. Well, guess what? That's a thought.
right,
The thought is I'm being thrown under the bus. The feeling is sadness, rejection, um, and it's important to tease them out. So a lot of times people don't feel like they have a power over their thoughts because they don't even know what's a thought and a feeling. So first thing you have to establish what that is. And then you write down the thought that is causing you emotional distress and you look at it. Is it rational or is it irrational? Is it fact or fiction? So for example, I'll never get over this. That's not really a fact. You're telling yourself stories based on a skewed way of thinking. It's like you have smudgy glasses.
right,
You're not going to be able to see life clearly if you look through a veil of smudge. So then you look at that and say, okay, let's identify the cognitive distortion. And that would be number one, all or nothing thinking. And number two would be fortune telling. Fortune telling is thinking you can tell the future. Um, even with other people. You've always been like that and you're always going to be that way. You're always going to be anxious. Well, that is just irrational. So a
right,
lot of times we feed ourselves and we are fed irrational narratives about ourselves that just aren't true. And it's very self-limiting because then we're kind of trapped in a victim mentality instead of a victor mentality. We become a victim of our thoughts and feelings rather than having some management over them.
right. No, that makes sense. So it kind of comes down to just awareness. Like the first step, would you say, would just be becoming aware of these
Becoming
thoughts?
aware of the thoughts and feelings and
Mhm.
identifying, just pretend like you have a magnifying glass. I use a magnifying glass as a metaphor for looking behind your thoughts and identifying the distortions, identify the irrational thinking, and then thinking of a new way of looking at things. You
Right,
know, I'll, I'll never get my life together. You know, well, up until now, I've had a challenge in making things work out for me. That would be factual.
right. And
I
even you could say
you
something
know,
positive.
I'm a loser. I can't get my life together. Nothing I
Mhm.
do is right. That's all or nothing thinking. When we think that way, we're going to be super depressed because we're going to believe it and we're going to think that's fact and not fiction. So constantly look at what you're thinking and I'd ask yourself, is that fact or fiction? Is it stories I'm telling myself? And then imagine yourself, you have like a pencil and an eraser and now it's time for me to edit that story. That narrative is outdated and is not even true.
Absolutely. So I see that one of the tools is reflecting and journaling. Is that how would you approach that? Like, are those the questions that you would ask?
Well, journaling is real helpful because you write down your thoughts and then you look at them. And you write about what you're writing. You're looking at what the feelings that you're writing about and you look at them and it would be more helpful then to identify things but also to kind of get it out because sometimes we have it ricochet in our head and we don't really realize how irrational it might be or how unhealthy it might be or how victim like it might be. by putting it out on paper, we could see things more clearly.
Absolutely. And so, could you share with us, and listeners, grab a pad and a pen? Can you share with us maybe one or two prompts for journaling that you would recommend?
Sure. So, one prompt would be to say, up until now, these are some things that I have struggled with. And then you write it down. And these are some ways that I can uh, master these issues. So, for instance, if you're afraid of asking people for a lunch date or to get together because you're afraid of rejection, you can first thing look at your lack of confidence and think, okay, if someone cannot, you know, go out with me, or someone does not want to, have lunch with me, or can't have lunch with me, would that mean that I'm more inferior as a person? So you could use kind of the Socratic method and say, okay, what would that mean?
Right.
And dissect that, because a lot of times we're so afraid of rejection, we don't really think behind that. And why are we afraid of rejection? Because we think that their opinion of us is more important than who our opinion of us.
Wow.
And so I think that would be a good way to get to what's called your core beliefs. We all have, if we have depression or anxiety, we all have a couple core beliefs that are unhealthy and irrational. So, for example, let's dig down to the core in that example I just gave you. So, afraid to ask someone for a date. Okay. If they said no, what would that mean? That would mean maybe they don't want to go out with me. Okay. And then you ask yourself again, we're digging deep. If that was true, what would that mean? That would mean that I'm not likable. If that was true, what would that mean? That would mean that people don't want to be around me. If that was true, what would that mean? That would mean I'm a loser. So that is the core belief. You're not really just afraid of rejection. It's just a symptom of that core belief that you feel like you're not good enough and that other people are better than you and that you're a loser.
Wow. That
And
makes
if we identify the core beliefs, we can stamp out a lot of those extraneous beliefs that affect us in everyday life, but we have to be aware of them first. And by asking yourself, okay, if that was true, what would that mean? That's how you can get to your core beliefs. And we often operate on one or two core beliefs. Now, we can have positive core beliefs, such as I am worthwhile, I'm important. So it could work that way too,
right. Just changing it. Flip it around, even. I am enough.
right? Exactly.
Oh, that's great.
So if you feel like you're enough, you're not going to have that fear of rejection. All right, maybe you feel a little funny if someone, says, "Oh no, I can't," and doesn't seem to be interested in getting together. All right, so you might be disappointed, but it's not going to actually make or break your mental health. And you're not going to think, "What did I do wrong? If I acted only this way, I blew it. I shouldn't have done this, maybe then they would have wanted to go out with me." You wouldn't have all these self recriminations.
Right. That just continues spiraling down. Um,
Exactly.
I think it's so important to something that I learned from Louise Hay. She mentioned, a belief is just a thought we continue to think over and over again. And so at any time, you can change that belief by, changing the thought, right? Like,
Well,
just we 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 can change our thoughts. We can change our beliefs. We don't have to believe every stupid thing we think. Basically, is what I'm trying
right.
to say.
And we talk to ourselves in ways we would never talk to anybody else.
Of
Most
course,
people do not treat themselves like their best friend. And you know what? We are the only people, you yourself, the only person who you're going to have a lifelong relationship with. The longest relationship you'll ever have is with yourself. And we often treat ourselves the worst.
I love that. I love how you put
And
that.
this is called the double standard technique. Is think of some of the things. Let's say you have depressing thoughts or anxious thoughts. Think of what you say to yourself, such as, yeah, I'm such an idiot, I blew it, whatever, I ruined my marriage, whatever, I screwed my kids up, whatever you want to, whatever your thoughts are. And then imagine that you're someone you really admire, and someone that you really love said the same thing.
Mhm.
Would you say to them, yeah, you screwed up, you're a loser, you shouldn't have done that, what were you thinking?
No,
Or would you be kind and considerate and loving towards them and forgiving and be supportive and realize, you know what? You were in a lot of pain that made you act that way. And now that you recognize that, you'll work towards having better behaviors, and you are beautiful the way you are and how you are developing.
absolutely. I love that. That's so beautiful and it's so important. And I know it's challenging for so many people, but I think awareness is the beginning and just really becoming aware of, the way we're talking to ourselves and treating ourselves. And that's starts everything. Um, as far as the 110 tips and tools in your book, can you share your favorite that listeners can start using like right away, even maybe today, that are helpful?
Well, one of the things that I think is very helpful if you suffer from low self esteem, depression, anxiety is having coping cards. Coping cards is a hallmark of CBT, which is having cards that remind you of your worth and of your hope. And they could be in the form of like a note card, like an old fashioned file card. It
Mhm.
could be, sticky notes on your computer. It could be like sticky notes just by your computer. And it could be a quote that keeps you inspired. It could be an affirmation, such as, I am beautiful no matter what. Um, it can be, when this happens, this is what I need to remember. Because sometimes when we're in the throes of emotion, we might not use good judgment in calming ourselves down. So I think coping cards, whatever you need to give yourself some support during the day, is very, very helpful. I also
Absolutely.
like metaphorical toolkits. I have done that a lot with my clients, and I even do that in my live presentations. In fact, I'm doing a presentation tomorrow and I'm putting together a little toolkit. And these are symbols and metaphors, tangible metaphors of important lessons of mental health, mental health and wellness. And what I'm putting in tomorrow is those little, like a little pencil with an eraser. It's okay to make mistakes, so that to avoid perfectionism and look more towards being authentic. And the writing is, edit your story about yourself, narrate it differently, and you have the ability to write yourself a happier ending. You have the power to change your life. That's an example.
Love
Another
it.
example is Hershey Kisses. Make sure that you're self compassionate and empathetic towards others. Kindness goes a long way. And the kinder we can be to ourselves and others, the happier we're going to be. Another one is an elastic band. Make sure that you manage stress instead of carry it. A rubber band, if it's stretched too much, it's going to break. But
Mhm.
if it not stretched enough, it's going to be limp. So you just need enough stretch to have some form and function, stay involved, stay committed, but not too much that you're overextended, but not too little that you're feeling like you're not involved.
I love that because that was actually going to be my next question. I was going to, because I know your book is great. It's a great resource for therapists. And I was going to ask you, what are some creative ways professionals can use these tools in their sessions? And you just gave a perfect example. I love all of that.
Definitely. And I would have people um, have tangible things that they can do to work on their regrets or work on their shoulds. Like, for example, in my office, I had a should jar. I actually put the word should on a jar, and my clients would come in and they said, "Can I borrow your should jar?" And they would have a should that they've been struggling with, and they'd put it in the jar, like a little on a little slip of paper.
I love
So
it.
it's something tangible to remind them. I also like active things such as affirmation bowl or a box. Every maybe you put a whole bunch of affirmations of things that relate to you. You can look up on the computer, or you can just brainstorm ideas or get an affirmation journal or a book, and maybe print out some of those affirmations, cut them up into strips, put them in a box or a jar or something, and every day you can pick out one, and that could be your mantra for the day.
Absolutely. Love it. I love it. Yeah, I also do something. My kids think I'm crazy. I'll go in the bathroom and write with lipstick, I am enough, on my boys' mirror, and they're like, "Oh my gosh,
Cool.
you're so embarrassing." But just reading that and reminding yourself that, that was a struggle that I had, and just those affirmations I live by them. I mean, I have a journal. I read them daily. They're just so helpful.
That's great.
Just
Well,
keeping
it's
things
good
in a
to keep
perspective.
things in the forefront of your mind because it's estimated we have about at least 40,000 negative thoughts a day. And we want to make sure that we have positive thoughts too, and we remind ourselves of how to stay positive.
So yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I did hear that psychologists say 40 to 60,000 thoughts a day, and most of them, like 90 something percent, are negative. But isn't it true that like such a large percentage of them are repetitive, like the same negative thought?
Yep, that's very true. Um, just think of a newspaper and think of the front page of the newspaper. Some people live their lives
Right.
years later as if the old news is front page of the newspaper because they just can't get over how they either screwed up or that they didn't know then what they knew now and they can't forgive themselves and they beat themselves up.
Hmm.
And just think of what is on your front page of your newspaper figuratively right now. What are the things that you think about that are just repetitive thoughts that you just can't get unstuck with? And then what would be a better front page that reflects you better now?
Right.
That will take a lot of self forgiveness, compassion, and healing. People who have had a lot of post traumatic stress stay in the post traumatic stress. Sometimes they feed themselves with alcohol or food or some sort of addictive behavior to blunt the pain. But really, if you look towards post traumatic growth after post traumatic stress, you can make a lot of meaning of the pain that you have gone through.
Absolutely. I'm one of those people. So, and I've actually gone the other route too, with using alcohol, just because sometimes when you're not aware of these things, and this is why I'm so excited to have you on here, because there are a lot of people that don't have access to therapy. And we live in such great times with technology where people can, come on and listen to a podcast, and maybe they can't afford weekly sessions, but they can afford certainly to purchase your books or your cards. Um, so I'm so grateful for that. But yes, I've been through that, and I, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, is just I found meaning in all the things that I went through, and I'm like, you know what? I'm I did a lot of studying, and I really feel, for me personally, that it's my mission to help others with these tips and tools that have really helped me in my life. So
Well, I think that's beautiful because you have taken things that have been very difficult and very challenging into something that has provided meaning for you and others. And that's really a beautiful thing.
thank
And
you.
that shows how post traumatic growth can follow post traumatic stress.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if anybody out there listening is going through it, I mean, there there are so many things that we can learn, and that our pain can actually end up being so beneficial, at the end, like helpful for others. So all right.
I do have a saying that I like, and that is No matter how many wrong turns you take, it doesn't mean it won't bring you to the right place.
That I love that. I love that. I can't wait to re-listen to this and write that down. Oh,
Because
wow.
a lot of times the wrong turns really do bring you to the right place. When I look back at my life, I made a lot of dumb choices and choices I would never even think of making now, but somehow it brought me to the right place.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I love that. All right. So, just a couple more questions. What advice would you give to somebody who feels stuck in their mental health journey and is unsure where to begin?
I think that having CBT self help exercises and a guide such as my book and others, there's plenty of books on CBT out there and plenty of self help books, is really important because you're not going to have new solutions with old ways of thinking. I think that was Thomas Edison said that, something like that.
Yes, yes.
So a lot of times people just don't have the skills. They don't have the knowledge of how to change. You know, if you tell someone, oh, just cheer up or look at a brighter side, we need skills to know how to actually do that. How to have a diary, how to have a log, how to challenge a cognitive distortion. People aren't going to know that unless they have some structure. So I would say get some sort of book or get some sort of, even look up on the internet of different things, and you have to work at it. The one thing that struck me when I was a therapist is how much work clients did between sessions,
Mhm.
because the work mostly is not done in the session. It's between the sessions. They have to kind of practice. They maybe will do some journaling. They will do maybe some logs or fill out a worksheet that I had given them. There's a lot to do because if you just intend that you're going to be fixed once a week, if you see, say, a therapist once a week, that's not going to happen. Basically, it's showing people how they can use different tools to change their lives.
Right. And it can be a forever journey, throughout the whole life, just especially if you have a lot of things that you have been carrying with you. But I think I love that answer because I think a lot of people do believe that they can just go see a therapist and that, they're just going to be fixed. Um,
Right. No, that doesn't happen. It
right.
basically helps you look at things in different ways and offers you different skills so that you can do the practice. I remember once having this woman come and said to my office, and she said she always carried this like real big backpack around with like all this stuff in it. And she saw that as an analogy to her life, that she had all this baggage and she just can't be mindful of the present because she's so stuck in some of the things that happened to her, some of the things that she happened to do. And she says, as she went through therapy, she stopped taking as much in that backpack anymore
Wow.
because she felt like she was lighter and didn't need to have all these things just in case.
Yes. Yes. I think so many of us do that. I love that. Well, if our listeners take away just one thing from this interview today with you, what would you want it to be?
Live like a victor, a victor, and not like a victim. A victim is going to keep on having the same repetitive thoughts that cause them to not think in healthy ways. And you can be a victor in empowering yourself to change your thoughts, to change your life. And never blame anybody else for your choices now. Yeah, maybe some people didn't do so great when you were younger, but now we have the ability to change. And we need to empower ourselves to be a victor instead of a victim.
I love that. And forgiveness is such a huge part, not just for ourselves, but also for other people. And it's so
Absolutely.
healing.
Because if you go to a furniture store, you don't get milk.
Right.
So a lot of times we expect people to give us what they don't actually have to give. And once we forgive people for not having what they didn't have to begin with, it's almost like thinking someone should be 6 feet when they're actually 5'9".
Right. Right.
That's just, they didn't have it to give.
Right.
A lot of times people harbor a lot of grudges because people weren't more like they think they needed them to be. But you can't give someone something that you don't have. So usually if people say are unhealthy to others, such as, parents or caretakers or siblings or whatever, it often expresses the pain that they're in. And
Right.
that's why it's so important, as the flight attendant says, put your mask on first before you can help anybody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely.
Forgiveness sets you free. I remember I had this woman who did have a very chaotic, crazy family, and she could not forgive them. She had trauma. She absolutely had a lot of trauma, but she could not forgive them because she kept on thinking that would mean giving them a pass.
Mhm.
And I constantly would tell her, no, it's not about condoning, it's freeing yourself from the bitterness
That's
of
right.
what could have been, what should have been, but it wasn't.
Right. It's for you,
Right.
ultimately,
And there's many quotes on forgiveness that have to do with forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself.
Right.
And it really is, because once you let go of the bitterness, then you're not
You're not a
being
prisoner.
bound by it anymore.
Keeps you in prison.
It keeps you in prison. Yeah, you could actually think of yourself literally with bars around you.
Mhm.
And sometimes people think because, I didn't handle my kids well when I was younger, or I wasn't a good daughter to my parents, or I caused, I lost my job because I did such and such, and, I can't forgive myself. People walk around with prison bars,
They do.
figuratively, in their head because of that self-limiting belief, and they just can't get over it. And just think of that front page news idea. Sometimes it's not front page news anymore. I remember this guy who was married to this woman who was an alcoholic, and she was very abusive to him. When they were first married, he had an affair, and she blamed him the rest of her life
Ugh.
that he caused her to be an alcoholic. And it was only when she died of alcoholism, he was able to be free. He went to therapy, and he realized that he was a beautiful person who also had abuse issues that he had never dealt with. And therefore, he got into an abusive marriage.
Mhm.
And he carried around all his life the sense that he was to blame for her illness.
Ugh.
And it's such a waste of life. And it was so rewarding to see him break away. Now, hopefully, you don't wait for someone to die to be able to break away from that. But this is the
Exactly.
situation that I had. But he didn't have the strength to go for therapy before.
Right.
But
While
the
she was alive.
guilt just completely paralyzed him
Oh, well,
because
I'm
he
so
thought
happy
that
that
he
you
was
helped him.
a monster. And actually, he was the one that was being abused.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean, I'm so grateful that you told us that and that you were able to assist him. And so many people out there, are going through the same. And I think that for me, what I've tried to look at is like, anytime anyone's done something hurtful to us or has been abusive, like nobody would purposely do that unless they're hurting too. So if we can look at other people, not just ourselves, most importantly ourselves with compassion, but you know, everybody with compassion.
I have a formula that the amount of obnoxiousness or meanness someone has is the amount of pain that they're in.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Well, I've learned so much in this interview. Where can people find your book and how can they connect with you for more resources?
Well, I invite everybody to look up my website, Belmont Wellness, and I'll be posting this podcast and other podcasts on it. Um, when I get it. And I have a lot of free resources. I have handouts, worksheets, self-help quizzes. It's always kind of fun to do a self-help quiz of like how emotionally well are you and things.
Good.
So I have a lot of resources on my website and also my Amazon author page. And the new book that came out that's actually quite meaty. When I was writing on my computer, I didn't quite realize how big the book was going to be. It's pretty complete and it has a lot of different self-help assignments to help you get unstuck in whichever way you think would be relevant to you.
Oh, I love it. All right. I will definitely be leaving links in the show notes to all of that information. Judith, it was such a pleasure having you on the
Thank you for having
podcast.
me. I enjoyed talking to you.
Absolutely. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, stay well, take care. Namaste.